attachment. Yeah.
I'm online now. It just started.
Do you have a response to the reflexology?
What's that?
Do you have a response to the reflexology noticing?
Response to reflex. What reflexology noticing? What response?
So the thing, like my ears perk up, because I'm interested in this, remedial sort of stuff. Like, oh yeah, if I can just fix this body stuff or this emotional stuff or this whatever. So I'm like really keen on hearing her story.
I'm not surprised. So what about that?
Should I not feed that? Should I try to pull back from that?
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Just be yourself.
Well, there's a way one can be oneself anxiously, and a way one can be oneself just like relaxing into everything that is. Like, so I've been trying to do the sort of noticing, like you were talking about Monday, and so like I would look at a spot on the wall, for example,
Mm-hmm.
And I would start to move, or
Mm-hmm.
like like it would break down, like my fixed notion about it would break down.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd just start shifting and wobbling and sort of getting wavy, and it's almost like I get a sort of sense like there's a sort of interpretation, or whatever, sort of noticing at a certain level, which is a sort of, it's just a sort of interpretation of the way that experiences, or that element of the experiences, right? Which seems kind of like static in a way, right? And then there's this like if I notice, continue to notice, it's like it gets weird, right?
Right.
And then like it's like I was saying, it's like there's kind of like I step out of the realm of just feeling like I'm just me or something like that.
Uh-huh.
Right?
That's good noticing.
Yeah.
You just start with experience and look at it until you notice that it's not what you thought it was, or not what you expected it to be. And then you have what it is, and check that out. And let it, and notice, by participating in its texture experientially, you learn. It's not a rational learning, it's not a logical learning, it's not a learning you can say what you're learning, but it shows you what it is. But a good sign that it's effective is when you lose your perspective. So at first I might sit here and I'm sitting here, I'm looking at a wall, and after a minute it's just, and I don't know if there's a wall or if it's me or if it's looking at anything, it's just, and so that's a sign of good noticing. And then let that go, let it do what it does. It doesn't ever stop. And just by engaging with that intelligently, it shows you what it is. And then after a while, you'll start thinking about it again and all that. That's fine. Okay, so you just do that. And then sooner or later, you repeat the whole thing in whatever context. And as you get better and better at noticing this phenomena of being with direct experience outside the context of holding it to be any particular way, you'll find it's easier to do it in a context even where you have a more heavy-handed preconception of what's going on structurally and so on. But it's best, at first it's best to train in a context where you don't have as much identification, because you don't immediately come up against that and get sucked into your habitual, sort of knee-jerk orientations. But that's very good.
That's why Tiggy's are so good,
Yeah,
because you can't actually make them into something.
sure. Well, but that's an example of the same thing.
Yeah.
Who's noticing is Tiggerlies essentially, whether or not it's Tiggerlies proper.
If I'm looking at a wall or looking at a tree or something, I see the object.
Yeah.
But if I'm looking at Tiggerlies, there's no object to see.
Yeah.
Just Tiggerlies.
But if you look at anything, you can see that it is Tiggerlies.
Oh yeah.
Once you know how to do that.
Yeah.
But it's less obvious, obviously, if it's something where you already think you know what it is, because you come up against that right away.
Yeah.
It's like there's two sort of dimensions or two layers. One is a layer of direct experience, and the other is a layer of interpretation, which is interposed over the layer of direct experience. And the layer of interpretation is very hypnotically powerful. So it affects a kind of a censorship of tricking your mind into not noticing the actual nature of what's being experienced. And so, yoga, the practice of yoga is simply to learn how to engage with actual direct experience outside the context of this layer of interpretation. And so you come to see what it actually is, you come to see what you actually are, and then you know what's going on here. Because the layer of interpretation is entirely inaccurate. It's entirely wrong, but it's very powerful hypnotically to create a sort of a de facto censorship where it makes it very difficult to notice the actual nature of reality, because you're noticing your categorized version of it, which seems to be very true and very objectively the case and undeniable and so on and so forth, because of this strange hypnotic activity. So any kind of a technique or trick that enables you to get to direct experience in terms of noticing that it's there outside of the context of interpretation is good. Now, as you begin to get a little better at being able to do that, you'll find it easier and easier to see through, to bypass the layer of interpretation in more and more contexts, and ultimately in any context.
Mm.
But it's kind of a skill that you develop because, again, typically one is so heavily under the sway of the hypnosis of the interpretive frameworks.
You say outside of the context of interpretation.
Yeah.
But the way I was sort of thinking about it, I guess was that it's like normally I only notice the interpretation or the layer of interpretation. I
Sure.
think that's all there is.
Right.
Right. And then can see like whatever the stuff underneath it and all that stuff going around it.
Right.
But isn't the interpretation always there? It's just like I don't.
Yeah, it's always there.
To it as much.
It's always there. You just learn to not attend to it. It loses its power to block the natural nature of direct experience as you become more and more sensitized to what that nature is.
Mm-hmm.
It's always there, more or less the same way. But again, it's very sketchy. Interpretive frameworks are not comprehensive. they're sketchy, they're partial, they're shoddy, they don't really cover everything. So this is a great opportunity for yoga. So this is why when you're starting off, find an area where your interpretive framework is thin, is just not so heavily enforced, which typically is something that you don't have no identification with whatsoever, no interest in. You're not, you don't have any dogs in the fight of it being this way or that way, as opposed to like your personality or your body or your social situations or whatever, which typically there's a very heavy-handed unconscious investment in all of that. Which if you look at something in that context, you butt right up against all of that stuff, and it's powerful. Yeah. Through lifelong habit and through emotional identification. But as you train in these areas, again, where the interpretive framework is thinner or more sketchy, it's easier to see through it, so to speak. And as you learn what's up with that, as you get an experiential sense of what's going on with that, and then you become aware of these two layers more directly, and then you develop skill at being able to deal with that and sort of switch gears if you want to, whenever you want to.
So you actually have to make a choice to switch gears?
It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. That's getting a little metaphysical. It's not. You just do it. Practice yoga. You do. That's what you do. And exactly how you do it, and if you do it, and if it's a choice or if it's not a choice, or if it's an accident or what, you just don't worry about that. Just do it anyway.
When is there not an interpretive framework?
Never.
You just said that there was some things that I misunderstood.
Oh, the interpretations are more shoddy or thinner, more sketchy.
But there's always an interpretive framework.
Oh yeah. But the interpretive frameworks in general are
they're not what they cracked up.
Well, they're not comprehensive. They're very sketchy. They don't really stand up, and much of it is just sort of sketched in. It's kind of like a movie, I've said this before, it's like a movie set where the part where they're shooting is all right there and it's all spot on and clean and but you go around the sides and it's just, it's just sort of painted in and a little bit of gaffer tape, and it doesn't, you give it a 360 and the room that seems to be a room isn't really there. And much of our experience is like that, depending upon what we can orient to as being important in our experience. Things that we feel are important or that we identify with, those are more fleshed out in terms of the interpretive frameworks. But there's a great deal of experience that is just sort of background, it's just there. In terms of interpretation, or in terms of a sense of it matters or is relevant to you or interesting to you at all. But that's in terms of interpretation. But in terms of experience, it's all the same. So that's a great opportunity. Experience is just as present in an area that the interpretation thinks is uninteresting as it is in areas where the interpretation thinks it is interesting and is identifying with. So this is a great opportunity again. So you can notice, in other words, the direct experience looms larger simply because the interpretation is thinner, is more closely.
So because I don't care about the spot on my wall, and I'm not that invested in the visual field.
Yeah.
Then I can notice that, and then I was sort of playing around with sort of coming back and looking at some things that I was more invested in.
That's good. That's a good experiment. But that's not important. Yeah. You don't need to study interpretive frameworks, because if you study direct experience, the interpretive frameworks will reveal themselves very clearly as to what they are. Whereas if you study interpretive frameworks, you're liable to just spin off and such right back into them. But still in all, that's a fun thing to play with. But your touchstone, the powerful thing, the important thing, is direct experience outside of a context of interpretation.
I noticed there's this sort of insidious thing where, like, I'll feel like I'm in contact with more of a direct experience, you know, this weirdness,
Yeah.
whatever, and then like the interpretation will kick in about that.
Yeah, oh yeah, right away.
Yeah.
And that's fine. When that happens, don't fight it. Just let go of the whole thing. And then sometime later, or later, like a second later, or a minute, or an hour, or a day, or a year, sometime later, then you restart the whole thing. Go to direct experience, and always sooner or later, interpretation is going to kick in. And you don't worry about it. You're not trying to stop interpretation. You're trying to trick yourself to letting yourself see direct experience. Because every time you see direct experience nakedly, it's very powerful. It's more powerful than you'll realize. It seems like nothing. It seems like just weirdness. And it is weirdness. But that weirdness, you're learning about the weirdness that this actually is, as opposed to the boring linearity that interpretive frameworks consist of. This is unutterably weird what's going on here. And you're training in becoming aware of that in yoga.
Seems to me it's always looking beyond the interpretation.
Yeah, sure. Beyond.
Once you look beyond the interpretation,
yeah,
there's everything.
Yeah, exactly. Because again, it's kind of like there were two layers and they always coexist. But the trick is to discover the way to have practical access to the layer of actual experience, actual reality.
So to get back to this idea of remediation, so if I think so I'm all fucked up or my body is falling apart or whatever,
Right, sure.
right? That's in a way it's sort of affective, the weirdness and like the weirdness.
That's a what? I'm sorry, say that again.
And effect of the weirdness that it's not capturable by interpretation, right?
You can't really analyze it. Generally, anything that seems to be a certain way means an interpretive framework. If there's a body to be fucked up or a personality to be fucked up, that's interpretation. In direct experience, there's no body, there's no personality, there's no fucked up. There's just infinite weirdness. But in practical terms, you're interested in doing all this stuff, just have at it. That doesn't matter. The point is is to stop living your life unless that's what your honest desire is. The point is to carry on, do your stuff, chase after all the things you're interested in. Don't worry about that. But if you want to come to see what's really going on here, practice yoga. But there's not an either or there. Practice yoga when you can. And it's as powerful as it is. It's as powerful as it ends up being. And it's as powerful as you are capable of engaging with it as. Which doesn't necessarily mean, hours of how much time you put in or anything like that. It just means really, really intelligent engagement, powerful engagement. And then this gets down to the life of your karma, of how much you're going to be able to jump on board with that, or let's say how efficiently that transforms you. But it will always transform you, at least by degrees. although you may not notice it. Because yoga works secretly, it works under the table, so to speak. It's not obvious what's going on. You see, until you start getting symptoms of something weird's going on, then it's like, wait a minute, what's going on here? At first, it might seem like nothing's happening. But the trick is always just engagement, you know, intelligent, intimate, experiential engagement with actuality. And the sign of that is it's absolute weirdness, and you won't be able to say anything about what's going on, or even think or feel anything about what's going on. You'll lose yourself, you'll lose what you're doing or not doing. Exactly. You lose what you're doing or not doing, you lose location, you lose everything. It's just this. And then that goes away, and that's fine, you let it go. But that's the practice of yoga right there. That's the whole shooting match.
I thought I was just developing a sort of a spiritual Alzheimer's or something.
I was just thinking of when you go see a guru, you're tuning into that guru. You're tuning in, you know, in like you don't usually tune in. You tune into this energy form up on the stage or whatever, but you're really tuning in and you're looking for something deeper. I mean, it seems like that's what people do. And that if you walk outside and just tune into a piece of trash, you'll feel the same thing. It's that tuning in.
It's the tuning in. It's not about what you're tuning into. And tuning into a guru is liable to be problematic because you're liable to have a lot of preconceptions of, oh, they're so great, I can't wait to go get the shakti. You know, you're in their darshan and you're just, you know, blown away. It's like blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, I've seen Brad Pitt, you know, wow, great, he's so cool. You know, it's all interpretation, it's all storyline. Whereas just the energy presence is exactly the same. I mean, it's infinite different flavors, but that flavor is unimportant. It's the presence. And yeah, garbage on the street or chewing gum mashed on the sidewalk, you know, let yourself see what that is. And that's as good as the best guru there ever was. It's all in the seeing. That's what's powerful.
So the way I was thinking about it was like, because you said last time or the time before that what you do when working with a student is you shift them away from their perspective, right? You feel into where the fixation is, and then you sort of say the opposite of what they're expecting, right? So it's
maybe, what about it?
Oh, well, but I was thinking that, like, you know, different gurus, like, they are basically just their way of presenting and responding. It's different, you know, than other gurus. So there's like
So what?
like that could be the value of going to other gurus, no?
I don't know. Okay, so again, it's not about response. It's not about what is said or not said. It's about, you know, the only value of an explanation is if it enables you to put that to use to see direct experience outside the context of interpretation better. That's the only thing that matters. And there's no absolute standard of, oh, this is better than that. Anything that works, that's it. That's all that matters. And it's not about collecting tricks, you know, it's not about collecting, you know, hear what they say, and then hear what they say, and then hear what they say, and take it all down and correlate it and pull out the gems. It's like, just find anything whatsoever that works to enable you to engage with your experience, you know, anywhere you are, and that is the kicker. That's all you need. So for more explanations isn't going to add to that in the least. Because explanations at the end of the day only exist in the framework, in the level of interpretive frameworks. The sound that's present, that is real, that is noticing. But as soon as I start using English, it's all fantasy. That doesn't make it evil. There's nothing wrong with fantasy. And fantasy can even be useful, but it's only useful if it is useful.
About fantasy and noticing, like I was doing the sort of noticing practice, and then like the thought was coming up about the strangeness, was oh, but I'm just imagining this, or I'm just like
yeah, to interpretation, yoga is always imaginary. Interpretation will always poo-poo yoga, because interpretation will see yoga, but it won't hit it. And it'll always just come up with a rationalization or an explanation of it right away. And that's fine, it doesn't matter. Because yoga is not for the interpretation. Interpretation is not supposed to get it. You're going outside the interpretation, and the portion of you that does yoga outside interpretation also exists outside of interpretation, and that's the real you. So it's the real you that does yoga. The pseudo you that you're used to identifying with conceptually and emotionally, which exists in the level of interpretation, it's just a caricature. It's a fantasy. It doesn't exist. It's like Bugs Bunny or something. So it'll never get what you're doing with yoga, and its reaction will always be just some sort of, explanation or something, but it'll always be wrong. But that's not important. It doesn't need to, because it's not for that. Yoga is not for Gavin. Yoga is for you. Gavin will always be clueless, just like Peter's always clueless. But I'm not clueless. And you're not clueless.
Peter, it does appear that it's like the clueless thing and the totally prudent, and they seem to it appears that they're getting more and more copaceous, like they get along better.
Yeah, sure, that happens.
More,
Yeah.
like, oh, yeah, it's just like, oh, okay.
Because
I see the clueless more clearly.
Yeah.
And it's just so not interesting.
Yeah.
That I just go back to, well,
yeah.
Actually, it's hard to say which one is.
Yeah.
Well, see, we're not simple integrated beings. We're very complex and we're very fragmented. And the different apparent layers of our being they coexist, and they are actually aspects of each other, but not in any way that makes sense or is integrated. But again, as you come to get a sense of that, and the more you come to see it as it is, the more you relax into it, and the less conflict you feel between the enormous difference between the different sort of modes of yourself. Like you're all over the place, and you're not really one thing. You're sort of a billion things at once, but that's cool because you're not thinking that it's not supposed to be like that, and getting upset about it.
Right.
As you come to see it more clearly as it is, you just relax around it. It's like, okay, this is how it is. It's weird, but hey, what isn't?
Right.
There's no question of true self and false self. There's infinite, layers and constellations and aspects of self, all of which exist, and they're not integrated. They don't make a nice whole, a nice functional whole. You can't say what it is. It's bizarre.
Well, the weirdness is like a sort of wholeness.
Exactly, sure it is. But it's not integrated. In other words, it doesn't pull together into some nice, simple simplicity.
Uh-huh.
It's whole the way the weather system of the whole earth is whole. It's one thing, but you have hurricanes and fog and rain and lightning and clear skies and high pressure and low pressure. I mean, it's a mess. It's this ongoing, dynamic, chaotic weirdness, but it's all one thing.
So I used to focus a lot on Kundalini energy,
Uh-huh.
and I would come up with stories about that, and like the significance of that and what it was doing and powers and whatever. And I think doing mudras and that's better, and not doing anything that's even better. Right? But I was playing around with this thing called TRE, trauma release experience or exercise, and which is basically like you put yourself into these stress positions and lie down, and then you let your sort of body shake, and it's very much like the Kundalini thing, right? But it seems like that whatever is going on, that sort of jerky, shaky stuff. It's like that's the weirdness again. There's this weirdness that shows up not like in the visual field, but just like in tactile experience or yeah.
But there's only one energy. So thinking of Kundalini energy and this energy and that energy is all conceptual. There's only one energy, and all phenomena are aspects of that energy. So when you're sitting calmly having a discussion like this, that's that energy. If you're in some mudra and you're twitching and all that, that's the energy. There's no difference. It's not like one is one thing and another is something else, and this means this and that means that. There's nothing but mudras. You're in a mudra now. You move your hand like this, and all of a sudden it's a different mudra. You move your hand like this, it's a different mudra. You put your hands like this, it's a different mudra. You stretch your butt, it's a different mudra. Because there's nothing but form and energy dancing. Not that there's actually form and actually energy, it's all one thing. But all of this that we see is that energy doing its thing, doing its process of being itself, dancing with itself, however you want to put it poetically. So there's no degrees of, oh, this is a mudra, this is sacred, this is powerful, and this isn't. Or this is a Kundalini engagement or a Kundalini reaction, and this isn't. It's just different extremes of exactly the same thing. fact, if you like to do body stuff, playing with mudras can be a very good way to do noticing.
Mm.
So you just in any position, be in that position, and then shift very slightly and feel what happens. The whole universe changes. Yeah, you can move one finger a little bit. It's like very subtle, slow motion dancing. And it doesn't matter what the moves are, but when you do that, you're engaging with the entirety of all energy. It's like a compass needle points north, even though the needle's just here and the magnetic field of the earth is huge and it's everywhere. But the needle is one with that field. And likewise, all forms are one with the energy field of the totality of reality. So it happens that things like hands are very sensitive. There's lots of nerve endings and so on and so forth, whatever, if you want a materialistic. But you can feel subtle energy very well with your hands, and by doing that and just feel it not as localized, just feel it, feel the field, and notice how the field goes out forever and includes everything. But again, don't get hung up on that it matters or it means anything or it's important. It's just an experiment. It's like looking at a patch on the wall.
Are Douglas Harding's experiments similar?
Similar to what?
Like what you were describing?
I don't know.
Because I was looking at those today, and like he'll talk you through an experiment, an experiential experiment, like whatever, 2 eyes, oh, 1 eye, right? God's eye, whatever. And then he's got sort of explanation or ramifications, consequences.
The point of any experiment is not like these experiments are similar and these experiments are different. The point of any experiment whatsoever is noticing, is to see outside of an interpretive framework. So whether they're similar or not is irrelevant. The question is it useful to you? And the usefulness is not dependent upon the experiment. The usefulness is dependent upon your sensitivity. But anything is an experiment in engaging with reality. Anything. You don't need to, read some book or hear some pointer from some person that's supposed to be special. You stand up and walk to the bathroom. That's an experiment of you engaging with the totality of reality. Can you see it? The important thing is you see it. And all these experiments, they have no importance or power in themselves whatsoever. They're just opportunities for you to see it. And anything, sitting here having this conversation is an opportunity for you to see it. Right here, right now, because there's nothing else to see. You are actually seeing it. The question is, can you let yourself see it?
You always know the answer to that question.
Yeah. But never underestimate the perversion of mind. The insidious perversion of mind. But mind's ultimately powerless. Mind is just all bluster. Because mind tells nothing but lies. Fake news. You can think of your mind as like Donald Trump. It's all bluster. No actual meaningful information included there.
Well, that's kind of the interesting conundrum, because there is actual good information, and there is the other stuff. And again, it's not always obvious what is accurate and what is a story, or what is an interpretation.
Well, for the purposes of yoga, anything is accurate that enables you to depart from the concepts and engage with actual direct experience. For the purpose of mind, there's an infinite hierarchy of, accuracy and inaccuracy, but ultimately it's all inaccurate. And yoga is only concerned with ultimately. Ultimately is a euphemism for actually. The mind pretends that there's, whole scales of relative truth, but actually all of that is actual falsehood, because there's only one relative, there's only one absolute truth, and it's the only thing that's true, and it can't be said or thought, so mind doesn't have access to it. Although it doesn't need to, because it is it. In terms of the mind's usefulness for thought and conception and, describing things and reading and writing informational books and all that stuff's fine. But it has nothing to do with yoga. And in fact, it's liable to be misleading, because the seeming usefulness of mind can give it a claim to partial truthfulness. So, for example, John can describe very, very intricately the recipe for something, and then I can go follow that recipe and cook something, and it's like, oh, he described it, and I followed his instructions, and look, I ended up with something, and it's kind of what he was describing and what I intended. So that makes it seem as if the description was somehow true or true-ish. But its actuality, it's not. All of that is a misunderstanding.
Let's say your explanation of interpretive framework is understandable in a way, intellectually, to help see through interpretive framework.
Right.
So
But it's only useful. It's only useful ultimately to see the way in which what I said is not true. Because what I said exists only in the level of interpretive frameworks, none of which are true. So it's all very paradoxical. The point isn't that mind is evil or to not use mind, but mind is useless in terms of attending to for purposes of yoga. Mind cannot liberate. Mind can only create limitation. And actuality is unlimited. And and finding that unlimitedness is the fruit of yoga. Because that's what this is, that's what you are. But mind cannot do that. Mind cannot capture that.
Mind's on a completely different wavelength.
Yeah.
Well, nothing can capture it.
Yeah, exactly. But fortunately, it doesn't need to be captured, because here it is right here. But what mind can do is distract you away from that, not actually away, because there's no such thing as away, but distract your attention into elaborations that seem, according to the mind, very useful and very relevant and relatively true and very powerful and insightful, notions. But none of that is actually true for the purposes of yoga. It's just a dead end. It's just a distraction. I mean, we have millions of people who are very, very erudite in terms of spiritual philosophy and spiritual traditions and all of this, who are not realized. Because the one has nothing to do with the other. But it's not an either or, it's not a dichotomy. It's not like, oh, don't use the mind is evil, don't think thoughts. It's just irrelevant. The thoughts are fine, and in their own dimension, they're fine. You can think thoughts and have discussions and write things down and exchange information and use the information and so on and so forth. But none of that is what it is, in actuality, is what it pretends to be or what it seems to be.
Actually, the mind is very useful.
Yeah, sure, of course it is.
I mean, it's usually been referred to as a pointer, and it helps point to outside of itself.
But it doesn't,
Something other than itself.
it can pretend to point outside of itself, but it does a piss poor job of that because it tends to point at itself. It tends to point back at itself. It tends to say, I'm pointing outside myself. Here, look, I'm talking about this.
A bit narcissistic.
Really good.
Because mind is always about something. Mind pretends to, conceptual thought pretends to be referential. And there is no reference. There's nothing to refer to. I mean, mind is stymied by its very structure. Mind can't refer to actuality because actuality can't be referred to. And so mind, since mind can't refer to actuality, it constructs all sorts of quasi-actualities that it can refer to, which don't actually exist.
It is a great facilitator.
Sure, I mean, mind is fine. I'm not knocking mind. I'm just saying that for purposes of yoga, you're barking up the wrong tree if you're depending upon it. And what's worse is you're liable to just be seduced into chasing your own tail, thinking you're doing yoga. You accumulate all these books and you'll read all this stuff and you'll be able to have very learned debates and learn all sorts of terminology and be able to quote sacred scripture.
So you used to talk about subconscious, and my experience is I'm hardly ever completely lost. I'm usually somewhat lost, but part of me is still, like you said, the two layers, I guess. Part of me is in the real layer, and I notice that it's not too hard, but it's just kind of vague because more of my attention is in the story. But if I see it, I go, oh yeah. And as soon as you look at it, of course, it blooms instantly.
Yeah.
And then you're in reality. So it's interesting for me that I start thinking about how maybe you could call it subconscious is continually aware of everything.
Yes.
And I wonder, like, because I had that sort of halfway awareness of it, and I'm driving even, and all of a sudden I see my hands or something like
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
And then when I look at them, oh yeah, right, and then I'm here. I always wonder, well, how much of that moment did I miss any of it? Because all I consciously noticed was just a little bit of my hands, or was it all completely recorded and appreciated? Because what this is God appreciating itself. That's what it is.
Yes.
So did God get all the appreciation that was there?
Yes.
Even though part of my brain wasn't there?
Yes.
Or not?
Yes.
There was something missed.
No, nothing is missed because appreciation is not of anything outside of awareness. If you're aware of your fingernail, then that's the totality of reality, and you're not missing it.
So then I wonder, okay, was the appreciation toward the story that I was enjoying Because that's how it feels.
It's not necessarily an either or.
Mhm.
Because, you know, the story will try to own it always. You know, the story will immediately try and claim it. In other words, you know, by querying it or whatever. But it's the direct experience that exists as an actuality that matters, regardless of what the story is doing with, is trying to do with that. That's what's powerful.
How about the, what I'm thinking of that's me, that's watching the story and sort of getting a kick out of it like I'm watching a TV show. And there's quite a bit of fun there. So is that what's real? Is that real in a way?
Well, everything's real.
Yeah.
You don't need to categorize these things in terms of, you know, real aspects and unreal aspects. You know, when I say direct experience, I mean a mode of being with what is here outside the context of interpretation. Now, what's here otherwise, you know, any other aspects of what's here, including interpretation, including your perspective of a watcher or whatever, all of that, and anything else too, is all reality itself.
Mhm.
But anything other than direct non-conceptual experience is liable to be self-referential and misleading as a thing to follow.
Mhm.
So it's that moment of that flash of engagement with just the, oh wow, is powerful, and that ultimately transforms your relationship to all the other aspects and layers that are there subliminally. But it's not because that's real and these others are unreal. It's not like that. It's just, it's like we were saying earlier, you know, you're not an integrated whole. You're a mess of all sorts of fragments and aspects that don't necessarily have too much to do with each other or not. I mean, whatever. But the point is, all of that is there and it's all real. But it doesn't make any sense. It's not integrated. It's not a nice, clean, neat system. It's a mess. So trying to sort it out from internally, from within the perspective of all that stuff, it's just not going to happen because it's chaos.
Well, here's my question. So I used to feel like, okay, anytime I'm not aware of ultimate reality, you know, it's because my mind is against me and tricking me and it's bad. But I realize that's just going along and I'm enjoying it. So it's not an enemy anymore. It's just like my favorite TV show.
Sure. Well, that's what it is.
I'm being honest here. So then my question is does that mean I'm a spiritual lightweight, or am I just like getting somewhere?
No, you're getting somewhere. You're doing great. That's a good
because
yogic
we've been trained to
response.
think, oh no, I got to turn away from that, whatever,
No.
and try to look at the present all the time, or I'm just no.
Dichotomizing things or partializing them or thinking that I need to get from this to that is a sign of the low level of development, of unfoldment. But when you relax and are more comfortably and loosely with whatever happens to be present and enjoy it, that's a sign of successful yoga practice.
Well, good, because what I'm seeing is even when I'm like that, part of me, like I just said, knows where I am and what's going on.
Of course.
And I'm making a choice. Okay, my little story is more entertaining than this. But
Sure.
then I think you might say, well, you just haven't really explored this.
No.
Amazing.
No. It's not that you have to stay with outside the story. And it's not that outside the story is better than inside the story. For the purposes of yoga, seeing outside the story will loosen up and transform your ability to be with all of it in a loose and fun and open-ended way. That's the point of it. So what you're describing is actually the fruit of successful yoga. So you're doing great.
Well, you can have direct experience with your own fantasies just as well as
Exactly, of course. You know.
Well, that's kind of what maybe is happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nancy, as realization develops, you don't become a special person. You're just you the same way you've always been. But there's less stress and tension about it, less pushing and pulling on it, less needing to get from here to there, less self-assessment as being insufficient and oh, I need to fix that or improve that or get away from that, less self-loathing, all these kinds of things, just sort of loosen up. And there's just this bizarre, multi-ring circus of all these incredible different layers of eventfulness going on, and it's all weird and fun and participatory. That's what realization looks like.
So I have a lot of that.
Yeah.
What about this unity consciousness and all that shit?
Which unity consciousness?
I don't know. What are these people that have, oh, that's so blissed out and all this thought stuff and all this stuff. It seems like you have to really abandon that
Of
to
course,
get anywhere.
of course. Those
there's
are
always
silly games.
Yeah.
It's
there's
silly,
always
and
like
it's
there's
status
no-
games.
Well, there's no unity consciousness here, so there must be more somewhere.
But it's not, you can't say what's here. It's just all this weirdness, and that's the truth. That's reality. There is no, I mean, what unity consciousness, what?
I don't know.
Somebody.
Yeah, all that stuff.
This is what samadhi is. Samadhi, etymologically, the word samadhi from Sanskrit, sam means with, and adi means the highest. So samadhi means being with the highest. I give you with the highest.
What's higher than this?
This is it right here. And samadhi proper is realizing that, is knowing that, seeing it. I mean, all this, there's all of this spiritual bullshit and pap that people have been indoctrinated in that is just inaccurate. It's just wrong. And, it's a shame. It's I suppose understandable, but really absurd to suppose that if one develops spiritual understandings, one's going to see the way all these different teachings fit together and they're all true. In actual fact, one sees that most of them are garbage, and they may be vaguely true if you stretch it, but the simplistic versions that people by and large fixate on are just garbage. They're pap. They're just plain not true. And you discover that by finding what is true, which is nothing other than your reality here, just exactly as it is.
I think there's more.
We're all missing, aren't we?
There's always more.
How are you gonna get there?
Actuality is more than itself, so there's always more.
You notice the word
I'll take you for a
She'll do your feet.
Well, that's true. We just keep discovering more and more things. But it seems like a release from identification with your body and mind is a significant post.
Sure, absolutely. And ultimately, released from identification with anything, or rather, more accurately, discovering the arbitrariness of identification. So there can be all sorts of identifications that can come and go, and none of them are any truer than any other ones, because identification is merely a mode of consciousness. It has nothing to do with any actual systems or or structures or what have you that may seem to be what's being identified with.
But the process of identification is very powerful.
It is, it's extremely powerful. But it's an inherent ability, an inherent power, an inherent mode of this itself, of consciousness itself. Consciousness generates identification just like consciousness generates foci. You know, it will always tend to develop, it will tend to show up in degrees of focus, to various degrees. And just like it'll tend to show up as identification. But those are not true in themselves. They are just expressions of the inherent mode of the intelligence, that it does that. Again, identification isn't wrong or false or unreal. It's just arbitrary. Identification is not about what is being identified with, which is the fallacy. You know, I'm identifying with my body, so it's about my body or about me. That's not true. You know, the body and the self inhabiting the body is just an accidental artifact of the perspective of that identification, which arises arbitrarily and disappears arbitrarily within consciousness.
What do you think it's comprised of?
And but the same thing, everything's comprised of radiant presence.
What do you think is going on?
It's just the mode. It's the mode of radiant presence. It's what this does. There's no structurality to it or anything.
How it does it?
Yeah, there's no how. It's the same way as it does anything. It's essentially miraculous.
Bam.
Yeah, I mean, how does light appear? You know, how does light appear? How does sound appear? You know, how does identification appear? How does thought appear? You know, it's not like there's machine or clever devices that are sitting off stage that sort of take all these things and push them into your experiential field. They just miraculously appear. Let there be light. Let there be identification. Let there be stupefying thought. Let there be confusion. It's all the same. And it's all radiant presence. None of it's bad. None of it's good, for that matter. It's all of it is unsurpassably weird. Weirdness is what we got. It's about time to take a little break. Why don't we have a little 10-minute break? So we'll be back shortly for people that are watching this video.
It's almost as hard as completely letting go of Christianity. When you're raised in it, you finally get it out of your system, it's that hard.
What's that?
To get all this spiritual crap out.
Yeah.
It's a really big deal.
Yeah.
Even worse because it's stuff you've adopted as an adult.
Yeah, so you had more.
Christianity is easy to look at it. Oh, my parents were square. You know, they flew this first. They had some weird superstition.
Yeah, surface
Stuff
level,
that-
but there's some Christianity stuff that's real deep.
Sure. The belief is fascinating. You know, we've all been so steeped in it, and because it's belief, it's held to be true. It's not
accessible.
It's not accessible because you're not aware there's an idea. It seems to be the exact fact.
The deep holding about Christianity is because Christ lives in the heart.
On the break.
The video goes up, it's on the
Not the audio. I'm your guru today.
Yeah, there's one out, you know, on this side.
What?
Hilarious.
Yes, this is my superpower.
Yeah, you hang out with Dinesh, she goes, you know. He does. Which is very good.
I'm so glad you like it. I purposely picked it because you mentioned how much you like mascarpone. That was easy.
This is it, yeah.
I have to give Aaron's applesauce a try. It's pretty awesome too.
This dessert is so good.
Oh, good.
Oh, man. What is mascarpone?
I don't know, it's some kind of cheese. It's a
It's a
Trader
cheese?
Joe's. Yeah, it's a little, it's like a cream cheese at Trader Joe's, and these round.
Is it sweet or?
No, it's completely boring. It's all that. The texture, it's like, it seems like tart pastry, you know, from fruit type. Yeah, it's all to it. And the strawberries make it nice and wet.
And there's little, are these pieces of chocolate?
Cacao nubs.
Oh, boy, I'm gonna be up all night.
And then cacao nubs?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I use a lot less of that than I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you back on the
On keto?
ketones
I
thing?
haven't really got off keto. I overeat. I don't get off. It's like I overeat fat. Like this.
Is that possible?
Yeah, you can eat. I mean, I can eat out of stress sometimes. So. Yeah.
Like the coconut here.
Yeah, it's nice. It's also nice without. It's interesting without too. What? Yeah, yeah. It's a slightly more elegant without the cacao. I got it when I licked this spatula and I mixed it with, I got like a whole bunch of cacao nibs and erythritol and it was like,
Fine.
well, the crunch is kind of fun. It works better than the cacao nubs and yogurt. It's not quite as, oh, they don't add as much sweet.
It's a benefit for the bar.
Oh.
So
20 minutes.
I went to the one at
It's like,
AT&T Park.
so I'm usually not told about
They
it.
made $5 million.
It's short, but it's intense.
They had Dave Matthews, which he was so good. And they had Dad, John.
I'd like to see what it's like to do half cream cheese, half mascarpone.
My client's gonna-
What is it made?
It's just mascarpone with coconut and mascarpone cheese,
Hey,
coconut,
cool.
cacao nibs, and strawberries.
It's like a merge kind of thing?
Yeah,
From my.
and Jeff, it was Jeff's idea in New Mexico because it was just
So
doing
they
cream cheese
had all
back
the
then.
free.
Right.
And I just talked to him, it was like half cream cheese, half mascarpone.
Well, mascarpone is heaven, it's nectar.
Yeah.
It was a blast.
I'm sure he's got half,
I love
I
the
make it by hand, one serving at a time at home, and I don't mix it very well, but I've tried it. I wouldn't do a full version. I would mix it well. I'm hoping it's going, because if it's home, I won't really touch too much.
It's an art.
Ah,
But aren't we all? I mean, isn't it all the same? I mean, after that's.
Well, yes, of course. That's true.
Just-
That's true.
Mom. Hey, how you doing? Doing good? Doing good? So I'll be home in about 2 hours, okay? Yeah. I'm down in Berkeley, remember I told you? It doesn't matter. Yeah, I'll be home in 2 hours by the time you go to bed, all right? All right. I'll see you soon.
Sure.
Didn't remember anything.
Yeah. What if you
She
write
still
stuff
asks you to
down?
bring ice cream and pizza home.
Well, I just do. She no longer has to tell
Did
me.
you read those? Did she read it like at the grocery store?
I used to do that,
Yeah?
but I think now it's probably even more confusing because she'll read it and then wonder where I am,
Oh,
you know, rather than just, if I, yeah,
just assume that you're home.
you know. Yeah, every once in a while I'm sitting there watching television or something or reading in the other room and the phone will ring, it'll be her.
Where are you?
Where are you?
How old is she?
97.
Yeah, text me.
Yeah. But outside of that, she's doing fine. I mean, she just doesn't recall anything. Other than that,
Did you walk and stuff?
yeah, she walks with a walker.
She still carries the stones back and forth.
Yeah. Well, she doesn't carry them back and forth anymore. She's very smart, see, so she figured out how to do it easier. So she's got this little box and the stones are on one side, so she'll just move them to the other side now. And she no longer has to carve
Why
them
is she
up.
doing that?
Well, I've got her, before every meal, I make her walk the house like one lap, 2, 3, 4 times, right? To get a little exercise. And she does that before every meal. And she has these little stones. I got them in the garden, so that's how she knows she's done it before laps.
Oh, it's for counting, I see.
Yeah.
I thought we did it.
No one knows what the picture means.
So Nancy's moment
My
there
friend seen her.
reminded me of my fair lady. She got it.
And she's
I
like,
got
oh,
you,
she told me.
By George.
By George.
I'm going to have to start speaking differently.
The rain on Spain. I just
Today's
heard
maybe.
How was your weekend?
And then I'm like, it's so weird how you have it.
Yeah.
Big discussion about cats peeing in shoes.
Yeah.
Why do cats pee
You
in
know,
shoes?
it is a body worker. It's like.
No, they do.
Yeah, they do, sometimes.
Because they're working very hard.
I taught mine in my shoes, my loafers, you know, I keep
I mean,
by
I
the
go
door,
really deep.
having a good time. Then there was this all long explanation that it was something to do with the ammonia smell of the shoes or something. Like that. No, he just peed it because it was wet.
People smarter than I do their feet.
I'll get these press releases out.
Yeah, it's all moves really fast. Oh, yeah. I mean, like, it's solid.
Why do you want to go back? What was the problem?
I'll do anything that would be,
Yeah.
to put it on my attention.
What was the problem in the first place?
I
When
don't
you got
have any
into
problems.
these?
Well, I got major things that I'm like,
So is she gonna take you home as a student?
I asked her.
She said no.
I know she's.
What she might allow you to do is just sit there and watch.
Yeah.
But I wonder if her clients would be okay with that. That's possible. You could offer to massage with the hands or something.
Yeah.
You don't want to.
I was watching for you there. So, you have to time.
And actually, I see what she's doing. It's not training her. But I'm not.
Yeah.
It's just what is her perspective. How do you know what is, how do you, why are you moving? And so, they'll probably just get all that in the next one.
I can see her every day for
Yeah.
10 days.
Yeah.
Oh, you can? Okay.
That's what she recommended.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was on, so she asked me to read for sure.
Yeah, we don't let them learn to just break psychology, lady. It's reflexology, lady. Change your whole business model.
Yeah, just that, just read it.
So, tonight I've been playing with the difference between this is all this and this is all me.
This is all what?
Me.
Oh.
And it's kind of weird and interesting, but and I'm not sure whether it has any value, but there's this part of me when I say this is all this is like there's me and this, which is not accurate, obviously. So I just wanted to put that this is all me. It's interesting with my eyes closed, I can kind of get there somewhat.
Huh?
The visual field makes it, it's like there's so much stimulation between the visual field and all the other fields. It's nice to shut one down.
Huh?
Is there value in playing with that, or is that just kind of?
Yeah, there can be value, but again, it's not valuable in itself. It's valuable as an experiment. You come to see the arbitrariness of all these different perspectives, and the arbitrariness of identification, and the arbitrariness of me. There is no fixed me.
Right.
You know, can you feel that all of this is me? Absolutely. I mean, not just theoretically, but you know, for real. Can you feel that none of this is me? Yeah, you can do that too. But there's no me.
So no me at all. Not
Sure, no me, or all me, and all of these are viable perspectives, but none of them are true because no perspective is true. There's no true perspective. There's no true orientation of things. It's like it's just like there's not a particular way everything is. But everything can be seen in an infinity of ways, all of which are valuable. But none of them are true, and none of them are more true than any other ones. So at the end of the day, you just settle in whatever's convenient, or whatever feels, you know, comfortable. Once you come to see the arbitrariness of it all.
Mm.
That's a lot of what they call non-attachment. Right?
Yeah, well, it's a basis for non-attachment, not because you're not attached, but because you see there's actually nothing to be attached to. Because anything that is there to be attached to, it's being manufactured by as an artifact of a perspective. So then attachment's possible, but you're being attached to something that you're basically just pretending is there anyway. So it kind of doesn't have a lot of clout. And you know, ultimately, you're pretending everything is here. Nothing is here. It's not a nothing like a negation, like some kind of absolute void of zeroness, but it actually is that in a profound way.
Is that meaning?
It is nothing in particular. It's nothing. And any way it seems to be is being generated as a result of a perspective, which is arbitrary.
Is there a way to play with the with understanding the arbitrariness. of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what you're doing will do that. If you know, it's all me or it's all this or whatever, you know, if you, to the extent to which you can do that shift between those, then you look and see, well, I can do that. Which is either of them truer than the other one? They're arbitrary. Or you can then see that, no, this is me and this is everything else. Or you can even identify that someone else is you. I can feel that you're me. And everything else is.
That doesn't seem to.
It's possible. It's actually possible.
It's actually accurate.
Yeah. Well, it is.
Yeah.
It's as accurate as anything.
Everything I see, all of you, are an interpretation.
Yeah.
Of mine.
Yeah. You alone exist.
I know.
Yeah. Well, you do know, and that's the goal of yoga is to come to see that this alone exists, and you are this.
It's funny because the interpretation can happen. It's like it's heavy-handed to say that you're just it and it's your thing. That it's all you is even, I don't even know how to explain it. But it just seems like it doesn't even go to that bother. It just is.
Yeah, it just is. But that just isness can show up any old which way,
Yeah, yeah.
and basically it's all good.
Yeah.
But any way that it shows up has no priority over any other way that it could or does show up. It's like any dream that you happen to have at night is not truer or less true than any other dream you have.
Very tempting to believe otherwise.
Of course, of course.
Like, when I'm meditating, I'm more real than when I'm
Yeah, no, sure, of course, all that.
having
Yeah.
a shower or something.
Yeah, I mean, all of these modes, they're arbitrary, but they come up karmically in the sense that, you know, we kind of have our favorites that we tend to gravitate towards. But at the end of the day, when you see that they truly are arbitrary, then the fact that you have those favorites is neither here nor there. It's just, so what? Because it doesn't matter, because if it was different, what difference would that make? None at all.
But it's useful to identify that that is a favorite which is meaningless.
Yeah,
It's
of course.
useful to identify that.
Absolutely.
You should close it.
with hypnosis, it seems like when you're working with people, it seems like one field between us. And it's kind of nice.
Sure. But in hypnosis, the hypnotist creates that situation. But it's easily doable because it's as true as anything. Because there's no you and there's no them.
Mm.
In hypnosis, the information becomes powerful, and the individuals become the recedes of the background. So then the suggestion is what's there and what's real, not anyone giving a suggestion or anyone hearing a suggestion.
Why does it feel like effort to like notice the weirdness and then also like notice your words and like the syntax and like the meaning?
Why does it feel like effort?
Yeah, like last hour I was having trouble keeping my eyes open.
Right.
And it felt like it was like I kept trying to make some effort to pay attention again, and while still being open to like the fullness of what's here.
That's just how it seemed. It has no importance. You don't need to keep your eyes open. You don't need to make sense of it, or not. So you tend to gravitate towards whatever mode seems to be relevant for you, and that may include a sense of making effort to be in that mode. But all of that's just you being you. That's what you would do in a situation like that. That's what you did do in a situation like that. So obviously it's what you would do. So it's fine.
Doesn't seem effortful for you to keep track of both things.
Which both things?
Well, not that there's a both, but there's like a seeming, like the interpretive, analytical layer of things, and then like the full layer.
No, they all coexist in the way that they do. There's no dichotomy or tension between them.
There's a non-integrated integration.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Very nice.
Doesn't seem to matter.
No, it doesn't matter. And yoga is coming to see the coexistence of all of these different dimensions in a non-hierarchical, non-prioritized way. And they're all always there. They're all always on. And the attention may gravitate more, by degrees, more or less to one dimension or another, but none of that matters because none of the dimensions go away when they're not being attended to. As opposed to the mode where one is more heavily in the grip of an interpretive framework or being hypnotized by an interpretive framework, where the effort to maintain that, which has to be reinstated in real time, becomes very absorpting and becomes very, creates a kind of a seeming censorship of all the other dimensions which are also present. But even though it's a seeming censorship, they're not actually not present. So noticing is a remedial practice where you're training yourself to notice that it's actually there, even though you're not paying attention to it. And once your noticing has succeeded, once you notice that it's there, even when you're not paying attention to it, then you don't need to pay attention to it anymore because it's, you know, it's always there. And anytime you do pay attention to it, anytime your attention tends to gravitate any particular way, then that becomes apparent. But there's no tension or fight to be in this mode or be in that mode or head from here to there or whatever. Because there's no hierarchy, there's no priority of these different dimensions. They all just coexist.
There seems to be a priority with no pain. Pain seems to present its own hierarchy. What's at the bottom?
Well, pain presents itself with a desire to alleviate that condition as best one can. And of course, you're free to pursue that as best you can.
I was thinking about that when we were talking about the mind being the thing that teaches you the thing, but it's like feelings do the same thing. Pain does that same thing to kind of teach you the transcendent nature of all reality.
Yeah.
It's like you can do that with pain.
Of course. Yeah, pain. Well, because pain is not any different than any other experience of energy presence. It's a flavor of energy. It's a particularly sort of loud flavor of energy.
Yeah.
As opposed to a lot of flavors of energy which are more quiet, you know, so to speak.
Well, and I mean, it's like any state.
Yeah.
State of feeling. It's like it's all the same state.
Yeah.
We're just making it up that it's something.
Yeah, exactly.
That's more preferable.
Yeah.
Because it appears that way.
Yeah. And the desire, and even the desire to try to change something or get from something to something else is also just appears and is not a problem in itself at all. But ultimately, as one acquires more facility with being able to, you know, become aware of the coexistence of all these dimensions concurrently, it becomes easier and easier to shift attention among them for your own convenience if you choose to.
Right.
For example, in terms of putting yourself to sleep or waking yourself up or you know, anything, you know, distracting yourself from a boring situation or anything at all. It's just a matter of shifting gears to emphasize another experiential dimension, more or less, and that accomplishes the trick. Whatever is present, there's always an infinite degree of qualities that are different than that, also simultaneously present. So when pain is present, there's also non-pain present. When tension is present, there's also complete relaxation, stress-freeness present. When motivation is present, there's also completely, you know, relaxed, unmotivation present, so on and so forth. But and so it's just a matter of shifting gears in terms of how one orients to dimensions to tune into this. So it becomes possible to sort of fine-tune your own functional experience just by navigating your dimensions.
Like changing channels.
Yeah, just like changing, it's just like that. Although it's not like a change of channels because it's a matter of emphasis. rather than like an on-off either or thing.
Keep going farther. I think I could. I don't know, I can get it done.
And of course, yoga facilitates the skillfulness of being able to switch dimensions because, again, yoga shows you the actual coexistence of all these dimensions. And it also shows you the arbitrariness of any orientation, and it shows you that in actuality they're not hierarchical or locked in at all. So the fact that your attention happens to be oriented to a certain, sort of a gestalt of dimensions is arbitrary. It could just as easily be oriented differently. And when you see that, then you can do it. As opposed to believing that you actually are in something that you happen to think you're orienting to. I mean, that's all noticing is letting yourself slip into other dimensions.
But any one dimension is as good as any other.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you play with going from dimension to dimension, you get anywhere.
No, because there's no hierarchy. You don't actually. It's always different and there's different flavors, but no better or worse. And yet you're free to hang out in modes that you find, attractive for whatever reason.
So the real you is that which shifts.
Yeah. The real you is that which can appear like anything.
But also the real you is that which never shifts.
Yeah, well, because what it is,
Is.
that can appear like anything, it is that. And that exists beyond space and time, so it's not subject to change or causality.
It does seem like I'm more aware of the unchanging quality.
Yeah.
When I have kind of a softer focus.
Mm-hmm. Good. Because again, a harder focus is related to more oriented to an interpretive framework, which tends to become self-verifying and tends to downplay any other modes that also exist.
So at some level, we chase after these things that we define as being things,
Yes.
and then like and then we define ourselves as succeeding sometimes. Right?
Define ourselves as succeeding, define ourselves as failing.
And yeah, so that doesn't really make any sense in the midst of the weirdness, right? Because nothing is
No.
resolvable.
No, it's a pretense.
And people talk about like purpose, like moving towards some goal, right? And like the business people, they sort of delineate very clearly, right? And they try to manifest that and whatever. And but there is kind of a sense of like a intuitive sort of ideal, right? There's like a feeling, a feeling pulled in a general direction, which like feeling pulled in a sort of mysterious way.
Perhaps the intuitive ideal is the nature of reality. I mean, that's the true intuitive ideal. And being pulled towards anything else is a fantasy that you're being pulled towards something else, because the only thing you're pulled towards is the nature of reality. That's everyone's fondest wish. I mean, that's the goal of human life, really. And it's the ongoing motivation of human life. This is why yoga is so powerful, because it directly addresses that as nothing else does. Trying to approach the nature of reality through fantasy is just liable to lead to more and more fantasies. Ultimately, it leads to reality because there's nothing else for it to lead to. But it's a seemingly indirect, convoluted route. Whereas yoga is the most direct route possible, because you're orienting to reality through the means of orienting to reality.
But it's still not guaranteed.
No, there's no guarantees at all. Because you're coming up against yourself as your own sloppiness. And sloppiness it's easy to see sloppiness as a problem, as failure. But by practicing yoga, you come to discover sloppiness is just the arbitrary nature of systems. And so it's discovered that it's not actually a problem. So then correcting or transcending one's sloppiness is no longer an issue. So one's freed of all that pseudo motivation. Sloppiness is just a name for the inherent imbalance or eccentricity of the system that you actually are.
You were saying one time that one would be a fool not to do one's heart's desire or go after one's heart's desire. I think that there is a sort of nature of the of an individual system.
Sure, of course.
And like moving towards that heart's desire, it doesn't have any relation at all to yoga or realization.
It's one and the same ultimately, because your heart's desire is the natural expression of your nature, and your nature is actually reality itself. So both approaching and achieving your heart's desire is facilitated by yoga, and ultimately is what yoga is. Because yoga is the only way you can actually achieve your heart's desire. Because again, your heart's desire is actually the nature, resting in the nature of your own reality, whether or not you realize it. It's easy to put that in another guise. You know, my heart's desire is to be rich or to be successful or to be whatever. But all of those are just, partialized fantasies of an invulnerable wholeness that is infinitely satisfying and nourishing and empowering, which is the very nature of actuality. I want to be healthy, I want to be loved, I want to be whatever, however one would characterize it. Those are immature fantasies of the actual wholeness, which you actually already have in your actual nature. So yoga enables you to recognize that nature and hence achieve that goal in truth, rather than just as a ritualization of it, a ritual enactment of it. You make $1 billion and you get to pretend that you're all of a sudden invulnerable and safe and whole and nourished and loved, and it's a lie. It doesn't really work out that way.
I'm getting this, I have to tell. Ever since Nancy and Erin were talking, I just got this vision of how I am when I'm in the state of what I would say is, Marsha, my limited life, and I'm going to a goal, and I just have this vision of there's 10 heads, this is like 100 arms trying to, figure out, thinking that I'm just one, one person. It just, I mean, it's even almost beautiful, like it's more elaborate than that. It's just this whole Shakti energy that's just, feeling lost or like, I don't know what I should do. And it's not, there's so much going on other than that one little, small little person thing. I'm just, it's a great vision. Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels like all the channels are playing at once.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a protective mechanism that the mind uses to try to compartmentalize it or create frameworks around it because it seems overwhelming.
Well, but that's the mind's strategy. That's its ploy, is to claim that, and then to try to convince you that it's so, which gives it power and gives it credibility for all of its machinations. It's like a mutiny. The mind successfully mutinies by trying to convince the rest of you that you'll be much better off if you let it run things.
So part of yoga is the recognition of that, and
Yeah.
part of yoga is being comfortable with this.
Well,
With whatever that shows up as weirdness.
it's simpler than that, because all one needs to do is discover the nature of this, and the comfort comes with. And the seeing comes with, and the comfort comes with, and the non-attachment comes with, and all of that, because that's the true orientation. And the mind is inherently invalidated without being negated or challenged. The mind will still continue its arguments and so on and so forth, but at that point, it's just another voice in the choir. It's not. It doesn't have any claim to any, greater authority than any other dimension. Because the inherent incoherence of what is here invalidates the mind's claim to the coherence is, manufactured coherence is the way.
It's like all the plans and goals and all those trips just run into each other and just end up they show their kind of inherent beautiful pointlessness. They all kind of just and but that actually then it's like the mind, thought, all that is becomes like a substance without any particular meaning. It's this substance. It has that same, aliveness and density.
Yeah, mind is discovered to be an energetic presence just like any other dimension. And trying to track it semantically is seen to be an absurdity. It's just another light show. In an infinite field of light shows. Speaking poetically, I would say the mind's a lot like the aurora borealis. In its texture.
Just a bit more visible.
Maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, that's actually a very nice way to put what the process of yoga is, to let your attention drift between different dimensions, let it flip among different dimensions.
As opposed to taking it to different dimensions. That's much more deliberate and less successful.
Yeah, typically, I mean, I wouldn't say it's opposed, but it's, yeah, I mean, however, by hook or by crook, however you can swing it. If you can take it to other dimensions, have at it. But ultimately, in doing that, in moving your attention to other dimensions, you'll discover the arbitrariness of all dimensions, and especially the arbitrariness of the dimensions that you're used to claiming as your home base, which invalidates that fixation, it invalidates that dependency on normalcy and identification and so on.
And somehow in that invalidation or that is sort of the natural beauty of dimension shows up.
Oh yeah, it's exquisite. I mean, it's infinite lusciousness, and I mean,
it's sort of it's free from having to be something,
Oh, absolutely.
and just is as.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all power, all life, all creativity, all possibility. I mean, it's the best of the best of the best. Interpretation is very heavy-handed censorship. It makes things seem smaller than they actually are, and duller than they actually are, and less alive than they actually are, and less creative than they actually are. Just steps down what's actually here into an absurd stick figure version of it that is just a lie. It's just not actually like that. And so in yoga, one comes to see these dimensions directly, and it becomes very immediately obvious that their true nature as the incredible condition that it actually is.
It appears like media is like, and I'm like a minimalist in media, but when I get to the media, it appears that it's like intelligence has come up a notch to to show just how we're interpreting it. Like how we're getting so caught up in that it means anything. It's like it's so ridiculous. I mean, it's like so. Yeah, I can't even make an interpretation of it anymore. It's great because it feels like its intelligence is showing me, like, with all these other dimensional travels, that this is just it's just another thing that you can't really take all that serious. Or not serious, but just see it from a really big perspective. Infinitely.
Sort of, directly seeing this, then something happens. I was just thinking of what we were talking about, space, but there's sort of some kind of mid stage or something, and I'm not completely into, an interpretation, but I'm seeing how I am going to create an interpretation. I'm starting to assemble the room. You know what I mean?
Right.
Just, well, yeah, it's sort of like waking up from a dream. That's what I do anyway, is I just sort of start a little bit out of the dream, a little bit in the dream,
Sure.
and just sort of recreating my world.
Sure.
It's sort of like Nancy's, TV show. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, and it's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun that I can do it, or that this is doing it.
Yeah.
That's what's happening.
Well, there's a constant and effortless jumping back and forth and jumping in and out of interpretations.
Yeah.
Like when we're talking now, this conversation, I mean, there's a kind of an irrational textual experience that is the content of what the idea of the motivation to say something comes from, and then all of that, it collapses by degrees or to a degree into enough structure to turn it into words and say something
Right.
that has some relationship, hopefully, with the irrational dimension of the irrational texture that
If something's
trying to
going
express.
on besides just, or doing
Yeah.
these words.
And it's just slipping back and forth in and out of all of these different dimensions.
It's like that movie, one of my favorite movies. I'm gonna try and find it, like Dinner with Andre. And they have that ridiculous conversation. It just goes on and on. It's
Slipping back and forth between interpretations in order to express and speak in words. That's the same thing that's going on in artistic expression.
Sure, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, it happens in all functionings. Human functioning is moving among dimensions. The spiritual mistake is to get stuck on overemphasizing an interpretive frameworks, a dimension of interpretive frameworks as having priority that tends to ossify the spontaneous movement and access to the weirder dimensions, because they don't conform to the linearity of the interpretive frameworks. But again, through yoga, all of that relaxes and loosens up, and then one has access to all of these different dimensions and different modes for one's functioning. And there's no problem being in any mode or any dimension or other dimension or what have you. Interpretive frameworks aren't evil. Just claiming that they're the be all and end all is silly, because it's not true. And that typically is a state of normal humanity, seemingly these days.
Artistic expression would have greater sort of looseness, or would have less.
Well, the purpose, the very nature of art, what makes art, is a dimensional ambiguity.
Yeah.
You look at a piece of art, and right away it's neither this nor that, and it evokes all sorts of, it evokes an irrational, rich, flavorful richness. That's what makes art. So of course artists are more or less deliberately doing this, or at least aware of it, or they can do it, whatever they think they're doing anyway. And that's what defines art. And anything that is done artfully, whether or not it's art per se, is the same thing. It's multidimensional. At their best, art talks here are multidimensional. They're not conceptual, they're not non-conceptual. They have they play on a lot of the ambiguity inherent in what's here as a medium of evoking that and of pointing that out.
That's why poetry works.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same. All of that. I mean, any high level human functioning is multidimensional.
Just for fun, I've kind of started playing around with separating the sense fields and treating each one as sort of an autonomous, intelligent entity. It's been really, smell has an interesting intelligence to it.
Yeah, that's a very good exercise to sort of, you know, and just sort of map the sense fields. You know, sort of take inventory of what's present and notice at how they're separate and the way in which they each are what they are, and because you know it counters the sort of, you know, the common sense thing of it's all just sort of smushed together into one thing, which is you know, a more kind of a normal thoughtless perspective. But when you see how these sense fields actually exist independently of each other, with their own entire implication and their entire different intelligence and their different, I mean, they're really like different, they're different dimensions and different intelligence, almost a different being that inhabits each of them.
It's like you might think of a lake as having a spirit, or like a tree as having a spirit.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Because they are each an embodiment of life force that has a character, you know, it has a characteristic. And all dimensions are like that. Their very nature is like that. You know, Western occultism, they characterize it as different planes, and there's different inhabitants on each plane, and there's the demons and spirits and angels and blah, blah, blah. But all of that is just a way of personifying this phenomena that everything is life itself, life force itself, and has character, it has flavor, it has a nature. No, I mean, it's not a particular nature necessarily that you can pin down, of course, because it's sort of infinite and open-ended. But everything is that, so that's, you know, that's no surprise.
So smell could be possibly the most useful sense field to practice with yogically, because it's the most overlooked.
No, not necessarily. I mean, look for yourself. There's no such thing as most useful. What's useful is found empirically. What's useful is what is a powerful jumping off point. And anything can be a powerful jumping off point. How powerful a jumping off point is more about the jumper than about the point.
It's about the off.
Yeah, well, ultimately it's about the off. Yeah.
There's something interesting I find about smell is that it's associated with discernment, you know, like sniffing something out or being like on the nose. But it also at the same time, it seems like it's in some way the most nebulous.
Yeah, it is very interesting. I think smell is interesting because it's particularly, let's say very obviously, sort of irrational and instinctive in its sort of mode. I mean, it's very primal somehow, very direct. I don't have much of a sense of smell myself. I don't know if it's from too much cocaine use or what. In another life, of course. Anyway, on that note,